Rain lashed against the windshield of the shattered Mercedes, trapping billionaire Audrey Davis inside as the Washington forest swallowed her alive. No cell service, no bodyguards, just the cold reality that the woman who controlled a global empire was completely powerless. Then a pair of headlights pierced the dark. Audrey Davis's hands gripped the steering wheel of her Mercedes G-Class so tightly her knuckles were white. Outside, the Olympic Peninsula was enduring one of the worst torrential downpours in a decade. Highway 101 had turned into a treacherous ribbon of slick black asphalt, winding through ancient looming pines that seemed to close in on her from all sides. At 34, Audrey was the formidable CEO of Davis Logistics, a Seattle-based shipping empire she had inherited and ruthlessly expanded. She was accustomed to turbulence, both in boardroom battles and international supply chains. But this was different. This was survival. Earlier that evening, she had uncovered undeniable proof that her chief operating officer, Richard Lawson, a man who had been her mentor and briefly her fiancé, was orchestrating a massive embezzlement scheme using phantom offshore shell companies. The evidence was encrypted on a silver USB drive, currently burning a hole in the pocket of her tailored Dior blazer. When she confronted Richard in a secure server room, his mask had slipped. The chilling deadness in his eyes had sent her running to her car. She had bypassed the main interstate, taking the coastal route to reach a trusted federal prosecutor in Portland, but Richard's men had been right behind her. They had rammed her rear bumper miles back, sending her heavy SUV fishtailing off the slick road and plunging down a steep, muddy embankment. The Mercedes had rolled twice before violently slamming into the trunk of a massive Douglas fir. Now hanging sideways in her seatbelt, the smell of deployed airbags and leaking coolant filled the cabin. The driver's side door was crushed inward, pinning her left leg. Rain poured through the shattered sunroof, soaking her pristine clothes and chilling her to the bone. She fumbled for her phone. The screen was cracked, and the signal bars were completely empty. "Think, Audrey, think," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. She had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat, but staring into the pitch-black wilderness, panic finally took root. Up on the highway, the faint sound of tires crunching over wet gravel cut through the roar of the rain. Headlights swept across the tops of the trees. A vehicle was slowing down. Audrey reached for the horn, pressing her palm against the center of the steering wheel. A weak, dying blare echoed up the ravine. Nathaniel Hayes wiped the condensation from the windshield of his beat-up 2008 Ford F-150. He was driving painfully slow, exhausted after a 12-hour shift at his auto repair shop in Port Angeles. In the back seat, his 6-year-old daughter Lily was fast asleep, clutching a frayed stuffed rabbit. Nate was 32, a former combat engineer who had traded diffusing roadside explosives for turning wrenches and navigating the terrifying, beautiful landscape of single fatherhood after his wife passed away 2 years ago. He almost missed the tire tracks. The heavy rain was rapidly washing away the deep grooves in the muddy shoulder, but Nate's trained eyes caught the unnatural break in the brush. He pulled the truck over, leaving the headlights shining toward the tree line, and grabbed a heavy mag-light flashlight from the center console. "Stay asleep, Bug," he murmured to Lily, rolling his window down just enough to let in fresh air before stepping out into the deluge. The beam of his flashlight pierced the darkness, cutting down the steep embankment. There, crumpled against a tree like a discarded toy, was a black Mercedes G-Wagon. Nate's heart hammered against his ribs. He immediately grabbed his emergency medical kit and a heavy-duty crowbar from his truck bed, sliding and scrambling down the treacherous muddy slope. When he reached the vehicle, he shone the light inside. Audrey flinched, throwing a hand over her eyes. "Hey, are you hurt?" "Where are you bleeding?" Nate yelled over the rain, yanking on the mangled door handle. It wouldn't budge. "My leg!" Audrey shouted back, trying to maintain her authoritative tone, despite the tremor of fear. "I'm pinned! The door is wedged." Nate didn't waste time. He wedged the crowbar into the crushed frame of the door, his muscles straining against the thick, reinforced steel. "I'm going to get you out of here," he said, his voice surprisingly calm and steady. "I need you to cover your face. The glass is going to shatter inward." Audrey shielded her face with her arms. With a brutal heave, Nate popped the latch. The door groaned and swung open, pulling the dashboard away from Audrey's trapped leg. The cold rain hit her instantly. Nate reached in his large, calloused hands, expertly unbuckling her seatbelt and supporting her weight. "Can you stand?" he asked. I think so." Audrey winced as she put weight on her left leg. It was badly bruised but not broken. "Lean on me. We have to climb up and it's slick," Nate instructed, wrapping his heavy canvas jacket around her shivering shoulders. The contrast between her silk blouse and his oil-stained work boots couldn't have been starker, but in the mud and the rain, none of it mattered. It took them 10 grueling minutes to claw their way up the ravine. By the time they reached the shoulder, Audrey was covered in mud, her expensive blazer ruined and her chest heaving. Nate opened the passenger door of his truck and helped her inside. "You're freezing," Nate said, turning the heater up to maximum. Audrey glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the small child sleeping soundly in the back, entirely oblivious to the life-and-death struggle that had just occurred. Who is that?" "My daughter Lily," Nate said, throwing the truck into drive. "My cabin is about 5 miles up the road. We have no cell service out here, especially in a storm like this. I'll take you there, patch you up, and we'll call a tow in the morning." Audrey's corporate paranoia instantly flared. "No, I need to get to Portland or Seattle. I can pay you. Name your price. I need to leave tonight." Nate looked at her, his jaw set. The dashboard lights illuminated the deep lines of exhaustion on his face. "Lady, there are 3 bridges washed out between here and the interstate. You're not going anywhere tonight, and neither am I. You're safe now. Try to relax." For the first time in her life, Audrey Davis had no choice but to surrender control. She sat back against the worn fabric of the truck seat, her hand instinctively moving to her pocket. The USB drive was still there. She closed her eyes, the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers lulling her into an exhausted, uneasy sleep. Sunlight streamed through the triangular windows of the A-frame cabin, hitting Audrey directly in the eyes. She woke with a start, her heart racing, as the memories of the crash, the chase, and the rain rushed back. She was lying on a surprisingly comfortable futon in a small, meticulously tidy living room. A wood-burning stove radiated warmth from the corner. She was wearing a pair of clean, oversized sweatpants and a thick flannel shirt, garments Nate had respectfully left folded on a chair for her while she washed the mud off in the bathroom the night before. She sat up, wincing at the dull ache in her thigh. From the small kitchen, the smell of strong coffee and bacon drifted through the air. "You're awake," a small voice chirped. Audrey turned to see Lily sitting at the kitchen island, kicking her feet and eating a bowl of oatmeal. The little girl had big, observant brown eyes and a mess of curly hair. "Good morning," Audrey said, her voice raspy. She wasn't used to children. Her life was boardrooms, private jets, and hostile takeovers. Nate walked in from the back porch, carrying a load of firewood. In the daylight, Audrey could properly see the man who had pulled her from the wreckage. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands. He possessed a quiet, grounded strength that made Audrey acutely aware of her own frantic energy. "Morning," Nate said, setting the wood down. Storm passed. I drove out to the junction at dawn and got a signal. I called a tow truck for your car. Should be here in about an hour to pull it up. Audrey immediately stood, her corporate instincts taking over. Did you call the police? I need to speak to the authorities. My car didn't just crash. I was run off the road. Nate paused, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked at her intently. I didn't call the cops. Figured if someone ran you off the road, putting your location over an open police scanner might not be the smartest move until you decided what you wanted to do. Audrey blinked, taken aback by his sharp intuition. Thank you. That was incredibly smart. I'm just a mechanic, but I'm not an idiot, Nate said dryly, pouring her a mug of black coffee and setting it on the counter. Drink this. You look like you're still in shock. Audrey walked over to the counter. She needed to get back to Seattle. The shareholder vote was in 48 hours. If Richard managed to declare her missing or incapacitated, he could force a vote of no confidence, seize the CEO position, and bury the embezzlement forever. She retrieved her ruined Dior blazer from where it was hanging by the stove. Inside the waterproof inner pocket, miraculously intact, was her personal checkbook. She pulled out a gold-plated pen and rapidly scribbled across the paper. Mr. Hayes. Audrey began adopting her best boardroom voice, the one that commanded attention and compliance. I cannot express enough gratitude for what you did last night. You saved my life. However, I need to ensure your absolute discretion about my presence here. She tore the check from the book and slid it across the wooden counter. It was made out for $50,000. Nate glanced down at the piece of paper. He didn't blink. He didn't gasp. He just looked from the check to Audrey's face, his expression hardening. What is this? He asked quietly. It's compensation, Audrey explained, as if speaking to a slow intern. For your time, your silence, the clothes, and the tow truck. It should be more than enough to cover any inconvenience. Nate's jaw tightened. He picked up the check. For a second, Audrey thought he was going to fold it and put it in his pocket, just like everyone else in her life always did when she threw money at a problem. Instead, Nate ripped the check neatly in half, then in quarters, and dropped the pieces into the trash can under the sink. Hey, Audrey protested, genuinely shocked. Do you have any idea how much money that was? $50,000. Nate replied, his voice dangerously low. I can read. Then why did you just throw it away? Look around you. Audrey gestured to the modest cabin, the worn furniture, immediately regretting her condescending tone. You clearly could use... Stop right there, Nate interrupted, stepping closer. The air in the kitchen grew incredibly tense. I don't know what kind of world you live in, lady, where you think you can just buy your way out of a thank you. I didn't climb down a muddy ravine in the dark to hit a payday. I did it because another human being was bleeding in a crushed car. You don't owe me anything, and I sure as hell don't want your hush money. Audrey was entirely disarmed. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever refused her money. Richard had betrayed her for a fraction of the company's worth, yet this mechanic, who was clearly struggling to raise a child on a single income, had just thrown $50,000 in the garbage out of pure principle. I apologize, Audrey stammered, feeling a strange hot flush of shame creep up her neck. I didn't mean to insult you. I'm used to everything being a transaction. Nate's gaze softened just a fraction. Well, out here we just help our neighbors. The tow truck will take you to the depot in town. You can get a rental car from there. An hour later, the yellow flashing lights of the tow truck reflected off the wet pines outside. Audrey had changed back into her dried, albeit ruined clothes. She stood on the porch, holding her broken phone. She looked at Nate, wanting to say something profound to bridge the massive gap between their worlds, but the words failed her. "Thank you, Nathaniel," she finally said. "Drive safe," was all he replied. It wasn't until Audrey was sitting in the cab of the tow truck, pulling into the small town of Port Angeles, that the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp spike of absolute terror. She reached into the pocket of her blazer to feel the reassuring weight of the silver USB drive. Her fingers met empty fabric. She checked the other pocket. She checked her waistband. Frantic, she turned her pockets completely inside out. The drive was gone. "Oh my God," she whispered, her blood running cold. It must have fallen out when Nate pulled her from the car, or worse, when she was changing clothes in his bathroom. "Everything okay, Mom?" the tow truck driver asked. "No," Audrey breathed. She needed to go back. But as she finally got a sliver of cell service, her broken phone vibrated violently. A flood of missed calls and text messages populated the cracked screen. The top text was from an unknown number. "We found the car. We know you aren't in it. See you soon, Audrey." Richard hadn't just tracked her car. He had tracked her phone's GPS right up until it lost signal, and the last known ping was exactly 5 miles south of Port Angeles, right at Nathaniel Hayes's cabin. Panic clamped around Audrey's chest like a steel vice. She stared at the cracked screen of her phone, the threatening text from her traitorous chief operating officer glaring back at her. Lawson wasn't just tracking the car. He had extrapolated her trajectory based on the last GPS ping. He was heading straight for the A-frame cabin, straight toward a single father and his 6-year-old daughter. "Turn this truck around," Audrey commanded, her voice cutting through the hum of the heater. The tow truck driver blinked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Mom, the depot is only—" "I don't care about the depot," Audrey interrupted her tone, brokering absolutely no argument. She was back in CEO mode, the fear alchemizing into pure, unadulterated adrenaline. "There is a violent corporate espionage team heading toward the man who just pulled my car out of that ravine. Turn around now. I will wire $50,000 from a JP Morgan Chase corporate account directly into your personal bank by noon tomorrow. But you have to step on the gas." Money talked. The driver swallowed hard, hit the brakes, and violently spun the heavy yellow truck around in the middle of the empty, rain-slicked highway. Back at the cabin, Nate was sweeping dried mud off the hardwood floor when his broom caught something small and metallic near the baseboards. He bent down, picking up a sleek, silver USB drive. It bore the engraved logo of Davis Logistics. He turned it over in his calloused fingers. His combat engineer instincts, honed during multiple tours in hostile territories, flared to life. The frantic energy of the woman, the crashed $1-million SUV, the insistence on fleeing immediately. It all clicked into a dangerous picture. Gravel crunched aggressively outside. Nate dropped the broom and moved silently to the front window, peering through the edge of the curtains. 3 black Chevy Tahoes had just violently parked on his front lawn, completely blocking the driveway. 4 men stepped out into the lingering drizzle. They weren't cops. They wore tactical dark clothing, moved in a coordinated spread formation, and carried suppressed sidearms. Private security contractors. Mercenaries. "Lily." Nate said, his voice deadly calm, but echoing with an authority he rarely used with his daughter. Lily looked up from her coloring book. "Grab your bunny. We're playing the quiet game in the root cellar. Right now." Without waiting for a response, Nate scooped her up, moved to the pantry, and opened the heavy wooden trap door in the floor. He settled her into the dark, reinforced space below, handing her a flashlight. "Do not come out until I say the code word. Understand?" Lily nodded, her eyes wide. Nate shut the door, locked it, and pulled a heavy sack of flour over the seam. Heavy fists pounded on the front door. "Mr. Hayes, we know the woman from the Mercedes was here. Open up!" Nate didn't answer. He moved quietly to the mudroom, retrieving a heavy steel tire iron and a high-intensity distress flare from his emergency kit. He wasn't going to let armed thugs search his home. The front door exploded inward, splintering off its hinges as a heavy boot kicked it open. Two men rushed into the living room, guns drawn. Nate stepped out from the shadow of the hallway. He didn't hesitate. He swung the tire iron with bone-crushing force, catching the first man squarely in the knee. A sickening crack echoed through the cabin, and the man went down screaming. The second intruder whipped his weapon toward Nate, but Nate was already moving, closing the distance and driving his elbow into the man's throat before disarming him with a brutal wrist lock he had perfected years ago in the military. "Secure the perimeter," someone yelled from outside. Nate grabbed the dropped pistol, checking the chamber. Two men down, but there were more outside, and they were closing in. He backed into the kitchen, using the thick oak island for cover. Down on the main road, the tow truck skidded to a halt, a quarter-mile from the cabin. Audrey threw open the passenger door. "Call the state troopers and the FBI," she ordered the driver. "Tell them there is an armed assault happening at this location. Do not approach." Audrey sprinted through the damp forest, ignoring the burning pain in her bruised leg. She approached the tree line behind Nate's property, just as a third man was moving toward the back door of the cabin, weapon raised. Audrey looked around frantically. She spotted Nate's heavy-duty air compressor sitting on the back porch, plugged into an exterior outlet. Next to it was a sprawling, untidy coil of reinforced pneumatic hose, fitted with a heavy brass nozzle. Without thinking, Audrey darted from the trees, her ruined Dior clothes camouflaging her in the gloom. She lunged for the compressor, flipped the power switch to maximum, and grabbed the hose. The machine roared to life. The armed man spun around, startled by the noise. Audrey aimed the brass nozzle directly at his face and squeezed the trigger. A concentrated blast of 150 pounds per square inch, compressed air hit the man squarely in the eyes, blinding and disorienting him. He stumbled backward, dropping his weapon and clawing at his face. Nate kicked open the back door at that exact moment. Seeing Audrey standing there, wielding the air hose like a weapon, a look of profound shock crossed his face before his tactical mind took over. He dragged the blinded man into the house by his tactical vest and slammed the door shut, locking the deadbolt. "What are you doing here?" Nate demanded, breathing heavily, keeping his stolen pistol aimed at the front of the house. "I dropped something," Audrey gasped, leaning against the kitchen counter, her heart hammering against her ribs. "A silver drive. It has proof of a $1 billion embezzlement scheme. The man who orchestrated it is out there." Nate reached into his pocket and tossed the silver USB drive across the counter. It clattered against the wood. "Next time you lose something, maybe don't lead an assault team to my daughter's house." Audrey's eyes widened with genuine horror. "Lily is here. I thought she was at school." "I hid her," Nate said, his jaw tight. "Stay down." Outside, a loudspeaker crackled to life. It was Lawson's voice, smooth and dripping with arrogant confidence. "Audrey, I know you're in there. This mechanic doesn't need to die today. Walk out with the drive, and we can handle this like civilized adults." Silence fell over the cabin, save for the hum of the refrigerator. Audrey looked at Nate. His face was a mask of cold, calculated fury. He was calculating angles, checking the magazine of the captured pistol, preparing for a protracted siege. "He won't leave witnesses," Audrey whispered, finally understanding the true depth of Lawson's depravity. "If I go out there, he'll kill me, and then he'll kill you to cover his tracks." Nate locked eyes with her. "Then we don't let him in." "The police. The tow driver is calling them. State troopers and federal authorities." "Good," Nate said, moving to a heavy wooden cabinet. He pulled out a customized Remington 870 shotgun. We just need to hold the line. Audrey felt a strange surge of awe. In her world, power was wielded with fountain pens, hostile takeovers, and NDAs. Here, power was the raw, unyielding grit of a father defending his home. She snatched the silver drive from the counter and shoved it deep into her pocket. "Lawson!" Audrey screamed, her voice carrying through the shattered front door. "The data is already uploaded to Kroll Associates' secure servers in New York. You're too late. The feds are already on their way." It was a complete bluff, but it hit the mark. Outside, the arrogant silence broke. Shouts erupted among the mercenaries. They were highly paid, but they weren't paid enough to engage in a shootout with federal authorities. "Breach the house now!" Lawson shrieked, his polished corporate facade entirely shattering. Two men rushed the front porch. Nate stepped into the hallway, racking the shotgun with a terrifying mechanical clack. He fired a warning shot directly into the roof of the porch, blowing a massive hole through the timber and sending wood splinters raining down on the attackers. "Next one goes center mass!" Nate roared, his voice carrying the lethal promise of a former combat veteran. The mercenaries froze. The roar of the shotgun, combined with Audrey's threat of federal involvement, broke their resolve. Tires squealed on the wet asphalt in the distance, followed rapidly by the wailing, intersecting sirens of Washington State Patrol cruisers and local sheriff deputies. "Boss, we gotta go!" one of the men yelled, dragging his injured comrade toward the SUVs. Lawson stood by the lead Tahoe, his face pale, staring at the cabin. He had underestimated Audrey, and he had fatally underestimated the stranger she had stumbled upon. As the flashing red and blue lights crested the hill illuminating the pines, Lawson dropped his hands in defeat. The ensuing hours were a blur of flashing lights, tactical teams, and statements. Audrey ensured that Nate and Lily were treated with the utmost respect by the authorities. When the FBI took custody of the silver drive, verifying the massive web of offshore accounts tied directly to Lawson, the treacherous COO was placed in handcuffs and shoved into the back of a federal vehicle. 48 hours later, Audrey Davis stood at the head of the massive mahogany table in the boardroom of Davis Logistics in downtown Seattle. She wore a flawless slate-gray Tom Ford suit. The bruises on her face and legs were carefully concealed, but her posture radiated an entirely new kind of hardened authority. "Richard Lawson is currently sitting in a federal holding cell denied bail," Audrey addressed the stunned board of directors, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "Every executive who signed off on the ghost shipments to the Cayman shell companies has been identified. Security will escort you from the building. Now." It was a bloodbath of poetic justice. She ruthlessly excised the corruption from her empire in a single afternoon, cementing her absolute control over the company. But as the weeks passed, the thrill of the corporate victory felt hollow. Audrey found herself staring out her penthouse window at the rain, her mind constantly drifting back to the smell of wood smoke, the roar of a shotgun, and the man who had ripped up a $50,000 check without a second thought. Exactly 1 month after the crash, a sleek, brand-new black Range Rover pulled into the gravel driveway of Miller Automotive in Port Angeles. Nate was underneath a lifted pickup truck, a smudge of grease across his forehead, when he saw the expensive boots step into his garage. He rolled out on his creeper and wiped his hands on a rag, standing up to face Audrey. She looked different, less frantic, more grounded. "I told you," Nate said, a faint, wry smile touching his lips. "I don't accept blank checks." "Good," Audrey replied, her eyes holding his. "Because I didn't bring one." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, bound legal document, slapping it down on his metal workbench. "What's this?" Nate asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's a vendor contract," Audrey said, stepping closer. Davis Logistics maintains a fleet of over 300 transport vehicles in the Pacific Northwest region. We need a new primary maintenance and repair contractor. It's an exclusive 5-year deal worth roughly $2 million a year. But there's a catch. Nate crossed his arms, leaning against the workbench. I'm listening. You have to hire a crew. You have to expand. And you have to let me take you and Lily out to dinner tonight to celebrate. Nate looked at the contract. It wasn't charity. It wasn't a payoff for his silence. It was a brutal, honest recognition of his competence, giving him the foundation to build a legacy for his daughter through his own hard work. It was exactly the kind of respect he demanded from the world. He looked back up at Audrey, the tension between them shifting from defensive to something entirely different, something warm and undeniable. I know a great diner down the road, Nate said softly, picking up a pen from his workbench. But I'm paying. Audrey smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that had nothing to do with corporate maneuvering. Deal. If you enjoyed this intense story of resilience, corporate betrayal, and unexpected romance, don't forget to hit the like button. We love bringing you these high-stakes dramas where true strength and poetic justice prevail. Share this video with your friends who love a great comeback story, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling audio stories every single week. See you in the next one.